Confined spaces can be incredibly dangerous and can prove to be some of the highest risk areas you can face while working. So while technological advancements and policies have helped us get better, unfortunately, the risk is still prevalent. It's the fundamental reason as to why this training is so important and why confined space safety should be important to you. So please, during this training, let's all make an effort to pay attention, stay engaged, and take this seriously. I promise, if you do that for this entire video, the next time that you enter a confined space, you're going to feel significantly more confident, and that's going to make a world of difference. So before we dive into the materials, I want to quickly go through today's agenda. The importance of confined space safety, defining what a confined space is, hazard identification, roles and responsibilities, entry permit and procedures, pre-entry procedures, equipment and PPE, emergency procedures, and then finally, the review. So without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 1, Importance of Confined Space Safety. According to the BLS, from 2011 to 2018, there were over 1,000 fatalities involving a confined space. Sadly, of those 1,000 fatalities, 600 of them were rescue workers. By far and away, the biggest contributor to their deaths was either entering an oxygen deficient atmosphere or the space had a toxic atmosphere. So just as I said in the beginning, technology and stricter policies have helped us make great strides to improve this nationwide. With that said, we've still got a long way to go. That's because 1 out of 100,000 workers is estimated to die involving a confined space. So the current table that you're looking at highlights the most common types of confined spaces for over 600 documented fatalities. The one thing that I do want you to notice is the array of confined spaces where workers have died. Everything from manholes to storm drains to crawl spaces and tanker trucks. With that said, this list is very top heavy. That's because 500 out of the 600 fatalities are shared between 3 types of confined spaces. So while we have a good idea of the confined spaces that are causing the most issues, this list is still proof that there are still a ton of different confined spaces that can cause you harm. I'll go a step further and say, I bet that there's at least one confined space on this table that you or your coworkers have been exposed to. So don't let history repeat itself. So take this serious. Your life could be on the line. Chapter 2, Defining Confined Spaces. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, I agree, confined spaces can be dangerous, but how do I know what classifies as a confined space? So to answer that question, let's take a look at the Occupational Health and Safety Administration and what they have to say and how they define it. According to OSHA, a confined space is defined under 29 CFR 1910.146 as any space that 1 is large enough and is configured in a way that an employee can bodily enter and perform any of the assigned work. Number 2, has limited or restricted means of entry and exit. And number 3, it is not designed for continuous employee occupancy. So another way to phrase these 3 is essentially that a confined space must be large enough for a worker to enter and carry out their tasks. The entry in and the exit out are severely restricted, and that space is not intended for regular work or any sort of continuous occupation. So now that we have an understanding of what defines a confined space, let's go one step further and learn about the 2 different types of confined spaces: permit required and non-permit required. Simply put, the easiest way to understand the difference is a permit-required confined space will have at least one or more of the following 4 characteristics. Number 1, contains or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere. So hazardous atmospheres can be toxic gases, oxygen-deficient atmospheres, and even oxygen-enriched atmospheres. Number 2, contains a material that has the potential to engulf an entrant. So for example, a few engulfment hazards could be sand, grain, or even water. Number 3, has an internal configuration that could trap or asphyxiate an entrant. So this could be spaces that have converging walls or a floor that slopes downward into a smaller cross section, which could entrap an entrant. Number 4, contains any other recognized serious safety or health hazards. So this could include hazards like unguarded machinery, exposed live wires, or even temperature extremes. Now, on the other hand, a non-permit required confined space is a confined space that does not contain or have the potential to contain any hazard capable of causing death or serious physical harm. Simply put, if you can verify that the confined space lacks all 4 of the characteristics that we just talked about, then there's a pretty good chance that it's going to be a non-permit required confined space. With that said, if you're still not sure, please reach out to your local safety team for additional support and guidance. Chapter 3, Hazard Identification. Identifying hazards before you go into a confined space is a critical step in ensuring the safety of you and your coworkers. So while there are a ton of different hazards that you can be exposed to, let's break them down into 6 different categories: atmospheric, physical, chemical, biological, environmental, and psychological. So in terms of atmospheric hazards, I want you to be aware of the following 4 categories. Number 1, oxygen deficiency. Number 2, oxygen enrichment. Number 3, toxic gases and vapors. And number 4, flammable or explosive atmospheres. So what this is getting at is when you do your atmospheric testing before you go into a confined space. If your oxygen readings are below 19.5%, this can lead to asphyxiation and ultimately death. Even so, if your readings tell you that the oxygen levels are above 23.5%, this is bad because it can lead to an increased risk of fire or explosion. As for toxic gases and vapors, 3 common gases that you're going to be likely exposed to is going to be carbon monoxide, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. That's because it can be produced by various industrial processes, mixing chemicals, and even decaying matter. Just note, if you're using any flammable gases like propane, this can create a highly explosive atmosphere where it only needs one small spark to ignite. Physical hazards are going to be a risk classification that can cause a direct injury. So let's talk about the 4 that you're going to have the most exposure to. Number 1, engulfment. This is any material that can cave in and engulf you. This can be grain, sand, or even water. Number 2 is entrapment. These hazards, for the most part, usually deal with inwardly converging walls or even sloping floors. A really good example is a gravity-fed hopper. Number 3, mechanical hazards. These hazards should be easily identifiable because it's typically going to be moving equipment like gears, belts, and various other pieces of machinery. And number 4, slip, trip, and falls. One of the most common hazards that just about every employee can be exposed to can also be very prevalent inside a confined space. So make sure to keep an eye out for conditions like wet floors and poor housekeeping. Remember, these sort of hazards elevate the risk of every other hazard that you're going to be exposed to in a confined space. As for chemical exposure, this can happen through ingestion, absorption, or inhalation. So let's break down some of the chemicals that you might be exposed to into 2 different categories. The first is going to be corrosive. This is going to be your acids, your alkalis, and realistically any other solvent that, when exposed to your bare skin, can cause serious physical harm. And the second, reactive. Some chemicals by themselves pose little risk, but when you mix them together, it can cause a violent reaction. So make sure that you have an understanding of any of the chemicals that you're going to be using. Reference your SDS sheets just to make sure, and get your safety team involved for any additional guidance. Next up is going to be our biological agents. So again, let's break this down into 2 different categories. The first is going to be bacteria and viruses. If you're entering a confined space where you're exposed to stagnant water, sewage, or even dead or decaying matter, this is where this risk comes into play, and you need to make sure that you're properly protected. The second is going to be mold and fungi. For the most part, mold and fungi like dark, damp, and humid environments. So if you have a lot of experience with confined spaces, you've probably been in those environments more than you've been in dry ones. In most cases, the mold and fungi that you will encounter are going to be harmless, but that doesn't mean it can't cause some sort of an allergic reaction. But it's worth noting that some employees are more sensitive to mold and fungi, which can cause them to suffer from some symptoms while they're inside of a confined space. The next hazard is going to be about environmental conditions. So depending on where you live and where the confined space is, this risk can play a pivotal role in your overall safety while inside of a confined space. The first example is going to be temperature extremes. Excessive heat can lead to heat stress and even heat stroke. Even so, freezing cold temperatures when exposed to bare skin can cause serious permanent damage. In some extremely cold situations, frostbite can occur in minutes. The second environmental condition is going to deal with noise. So if you're inside of a confined space and you're using power tools, just remember this can amplify the noise level, and that amplified noise level can lead to hearing loss. Always protect your hearing. Once you start to lose it, you don't get it back. And the third environmental condition is going to be poor lighting. There are a ton of different confined spaces, but they usually share one common trait: darkness. What I want you to remember is that according to OSHA, inadequate lighting doubles the risk of an incident occurring to you or your coworkers. So before you go into a confined space, make sure that it's properly lit. Last but not least, let's take a quick second and talk about one of the most underrated hazards that you or your coworkers might be exposed to. The first is going to be claustrophobia. In a nutshell, this is the fear of being in an enclosed space or a confined space. While this can be a problem, is that you might not know that you're claustrophobic until you get down into a confined space. This can set off severe anxiety, causing panic attacks. So depending on several factors, just being in an uncomfortable confined space could heighten your stress level. So if you're inside of a confined space and you start to feel overwhelmed, make sure to communicate with your attendant and follow your evacuation procedures. So while we highlighted several hazards that you're most likely going to be exposed to, it goes without saying there are a ton more. Being able to identify hazards is the first step in making sure that you have a safe working environment. With that said, just identifying hazards doesn't solve the problem. So make sure that you assign effective countermeasures to each one of the hazards that you identify. A good way to remember this is going to be the hierarchy of risk controls. You start with elimination, then you go to substitution, then you go to engineering controls, then you go to administrative controls, and then finally, PPE. Remember, personal protective equipment should always be the last line of defense for hazards. Number 4, roles and responsibilities. Starting out, this subject can get super complicated, as there can be several different people involved with a confined space. With that said, we're going to focus on the 3 most important players: the entrant, the attendant, and the supervisor. If more people are required, it's best to review your entry procedures and call your safety team for oversight and guidance. The entrant is simply the person that's going to be going inside of the confined space and performing whatever work is needed. It goes without saying, entrants have the highest risk, which makes sense because they're going to be exposed to the most hazards. That's why the following 5 responsibilities are so critical to know. The first is understanding hazards. This is going to require my entrants to spend quality time learning about the hazards that you could be faced with before you go into a confined space. Even so, you still need to be a part of the corrective action discussion. After all, these are going to be the countermeasures that protect you. The second one is just using your equipment the way that it's intended. Make sure to properly use any equipment that is required for safe entry and exit, personal protective equipment, atmospheric testing devices, and any communication equipment. So speaking of communication, this brings us to our third responsibility: communicate effectively. Before you go into a confined space, you should have discussed how are you going to communicate with your attendant and your supervisor. Maintaining communication with your attendant is going to be one of the most important things that you do. If something was to happen to an entrant, the attendant is going to be our first line to call for help. So make sure before you go into a confined space that the entrant, the attendant, and the supervisor are all on the same page with communication. The fourth responsibility is just going to be to self-monitor. Just be aware of your surroundings. Try to stay calm and tune out all of the noise. Focus on the task at hand, listen to your body, and trust your gut. If something feels weird or feels off, communicate that to your attendant and follow your evacuation procedures. And last but not least is evacuate. If your attendant or supervisor calls for an evacuation, you are to exit the space immediately. Overriding that evacuation call is not your decision to make. Just get out. Now let's talk about the authorized attendants. I want to start out by emphasizing how vital this role is. Being a good attendant is incredibly important. You alone are a vital element in ensuring a safe entry and exit of a confined space. That's because the following 6 responsibilities are pivotal to the operation. The first is continuous monitoring. This is where you're going to remain vigilant, both watching the inside of the confined space and monitoring the surroundings around the confined space. The second is communication. You need to be continuously communicating with your entrant. This could be done via radio, phone, short tugs on a line, or even verbal commands. However you and the entrant are going to communicate, this needs to be discussed before entry. The third is responding to emergencies. So in the event of an emergency, your role is going to be to communicate with the entrant and get them out of the confined space. The fourth is going to be preventing unauthorized access. The only person that's allowed in a permit-required confined space is going to be the entrant on the permit. All others are going to be unauthorized. It's going to be your responsibility to make sure that those people stay away. The fifth is monitoring conditions. So just like earlier, we talked about being vigilant inside and outside the confined space. Make sure that good environmental conditions remain throughout the duration of a confined space permit. And last but not least is assisting in non-entry rescue. So what follows under this responsibility is calling for help, giving specific and detailed information about the exact location that you're at, and follow all directions given by the emergency personnel upon their arrival. So the next role that we're going to talk about is our entry supervisors. In a nutshell, this role is to ensure that all parties are on the same page. This means all steps have been followed, the permit has been filled out, and work is ready to begin. The entry supervisor role is the procedural stopgap where all parties are reminded to double check their work. Just remember, the entry supervisor is ultimately responsible if anything was to go wrong. So that's why you shouldn't forget these 6 responsibilities. Number 1, authorize and verify that entry conditions are safe before allowing any worker to enter a confined space. Number 2, review permits and confirm that all the required tests have been conducted and that all procedures and equipment specified by the permit is in place. Number 3, terminate entry and cancel the permit when the entry operation is complete. then don't forget to verify that the surrounding space has been secured. Number 4, verify the safety procedures are in place for the entrance, such as the isolation of the confined space, atmospheric testing has been conducted, ventilation procedures, if needed, are followed to the manufacturer's specifications, and most importantly, the readiness of medical services if needed. Number 5, ensure that rescue and emergency services are not only available, but the means for summoning them is available. And number 6, evaluate, address, and ensure that appropriate actions have taken place to eliminate or at least mitigate any of the recognized hazards before entry is allowed. Chapter 5, entry permits and procedures. There are several different ways to do an entry permit, and if you've been around for a while, you've probably seen them all. With that said, whether they're digital or they're paper, the information should be relatively the same. So let's go through each of the 9 components and briefly talk about the information required for each of these 9 components. Component 1, identification information. On whatever permit that you're using, there should be a mixture of these 3 questions: the permit number, the location of the confined space, and a brief description or overview of the workspace. Component 2, purpose of entry. In this section, this is where you start to get a little bit specific about the work that you're doing. So for under task description, ensure that you write down what is it exactly that you're doing inside of the confined space. And for authorized personnel, at a minimum, there should be an attendant, an entrant, and a supervisor. But this is the area where you list all names involved. Component 3 deals with hazard identification and control measures. This section is for the team to identify all of the potential hazards and then assign effective control measures to help mitigate those hazards. Component 4, atmospheric testing. Confined space entry requires atmospheric testing. This is the section where you're going to write down your results. So for any permit required confined space, don't forget to test the upper atmosphere, the middle atmosphere, and the bottom atmosphere of the confined space where workers are going to go. And as for continuous monitoring, this is the section where you describe how you're going to monitor during the entire entry. Component 5, safety equipment. What this section is for is explaining all of the personal protective equipment that's needed for a safe entry and exit of a confined space. I'll note as well, any of the PPE that is required for entry should be based on the pre-entry hazard assessment. Even so, don't forget to talk about what exactly you have on site for any rescue equipment. Component 6, communication and coordination. So essentially the communication plan is how is the entrant and the attendant going to maintain a level of communication throughout the entire duration of a confined space entry. Even so, if something does happen and help is needed, make sure that emergency contacts are filled out and the team members have been briefed on who to call. Component 7, entry and exit procedures. The entry procedures are essentially what are the procedures that we have to follow when entering a confined space. With that said, the exit procedures are what are the procedures that we have to do in order to exit the confined space. Component 8, authorization. This is where the entry supervisor comes into play. That's because the entry supervisor has to authorize that the permit is not only filled out, but it's accurate and complete. Authorization of a permit should always be made with the entry supervisor's signature. For entry duration, don't forget to specify how long the permit is valid for. If the time elapses and work still needs to be done, a new permit must be completed. Component 9, post-entry review. This is the section where the entire team's going to come together, review the entry process from beginning to end, notate any discrepancies, verify that the work has been completed, and that the space is safe to close. The very last step is canceling the permit, and this should only be done by the entry supervisor after work has been completed. What I find interesting is how each of these components work together to protect all parties involved through 4 essential functions. Number 1, ensure safety by verifying all safety measures and procedures are not only in place, but are effective before entry into a confined space. Number 2, controlling access to regulate and document all persons who enter and exit a confined space. Number 3, identify and communicate any potential hazards that are present in the confined space or have the potential to be in the confined space. And number 4, compliance. This is where we're going to make sure that we're following all appropriate standards, including all university guidelines. Chapter 6, pre-entry procedures. All successful confined space entry procedures are built around a system that helps find and identify hazards while also assigning effective countermeasures that protects all parties involved. So before you enter a confined space, make sure that you know and remember the next 9 steps for safe entry and exit of a confined space. Step 1, verify that the entry permit is complete and has been authorized by your entry supervisor. Number 2, hazard assessment. Before entering a confined space, make sure that you spend adequate time reviewing the confined space and identifying any and all potential hazards. Don't forget to assign effective corrective measures that will adequately mitigate risk. Number 3, isolation of energy sources. Before entering a confined space, make sure that all energy sources have been identified, isolated, and locked and tagged out. Number 4, ventilation. After you've done your atmospheric testing, if ventilation is needed, make sure to install the appropriate systems that's based on the manufacturer's specifications and recommendations. Make sure that the ventilation system that you're using is positioned to blow clean air into the confined space. Number 5, atmospheric testing. Use calibrated gas detectors to measure oxygen levels, flammable gases, and other toxic substances. Make sure to record those results by documenting them on your entry permit. Number 6, equipment preparation. Based on your hazard assessment, if PPE is required, make sure it's available for all parties and it's being used appropriately. This also includes any of the rescue equipment that's on site. Make sure it's available and it's ready for use. Number 7, communication systems. Ensure that all parties involved with the confined space work is on the same page with how communication will be conducted. If communication devices are being used, make sure that they're being tested periodically before anyone enters a confined space. Number 8, entry briefing. The entry supervisor will hold a pre-entry briefing with all involved personnel to review the entire entry plan. And number 9, conduct a final inspection. This is where the team is going to perform a final inspection, not just of the confined space itself, but the entire surrounding area. This is where you make sure that all of the safety measures up to this point are in place. Chapter 7, equipment and PPE. Starting out, there is a variety of equipment and PPE that can be required in order to have a safe entry and exit of a confined space. Earlier in the training, we spoke about how important it was to conduct a pre-entry hazard assessment. That hazard assessment should be your baseline for determining what PPE and equipment is required for all parties involved. So let's quickly go over 10 of the most common items that you might need. With that said, let's start with number 1, respiratory protection. The type of respiratory protection that you might need could range from a simple dust mask all the way to an SCBA. So depending on the environment and the identified hazards, you could need one of these 4 pieces of equipment. A dust mask, which could be used for particulates and other nuisance air contaminants. An air purifying respirator, which is mainly used for areas that have sufficient oxygen but contain toxic contaminants in the air. A supplied air respirator, this is used in environments with low oxygen or unknown contaminants. And lastly, you might see self-contained breathing apparatuses. These are for high-risk environments that pose an immediate danger to life and health of any entrant. Number 2, protective clothing. So depending on your hazard assessment, you may be required to wear specific clothing like chemical-resistant suits, which will help protect you from chemical spills and splashes. Flame-resistant clothing may be required if there is a fire or explosion hazard present. If no specific clothes are required, I do recommend a pair of all-purpose disposable coveralls. This will help you from accumulating particulate contaminants on your clothing. Number 3, hand and foot protection. You need to make sure that you select gloves that provide the appropriate protection. And as for foot protection, you want to make sure that you're wearing the appropriate foot protection for the hazards identified. Number 4, eye protection. Based on your identified hazards, you may be required to wear either a face shield, safety glasses, or even splash goggles. So make sure that you take the time and protect your eyesight. Number 5, atmospheric testing devices. Make sure that you're using a multi-gas detector, which can adequately measure oxygen levels, flammable gases, and other toxic substances. Even so, don't forget to do your calibrations and make sure that it's in good, usable condition. If it's past its calibration date, do not use it and contact your supervisor. Lastly, make sure that you have a monitoring plan, which details how are you going to test the atmosphere throughout the duration of the entry process. Number 7, ladders and platforms. When accessing a confined space, you may need assistance with getting down and getting out. So if you're going to use any variety of ladder or platform, make sure it's in good, usable condition. Number 8, retrieval systems. So depending on the confined space, the appropriate rescue equipment should be readily available. This could be tripods and winches, harnesses, and lifelines. Having that equipment available is only the start. Make sure that you're properly trained on using that equipment, it's in good, usable condition, and you have a plan for who you're going to contact in case of an emergency. Number 9, radios and intercoms. Communication is one of, if not the most important aspect of a safe entry and exit into a confined space. So if you're using any devices to communicate, these need to be periodically tested, including before entry into a confined space. In short, don't wait till work has begun to find out that your radio isn't working. Number 10, alarms and other signaling devices. If at all possible, there should be audible and visual alarm detection systems in or around confined spaces. So depending on the location of your confined space, make sure that you have a way of being alerted to any emergencies. This could be hazardous weather conditions or fire. Even so, communicating that emergency might require a signaling device. This could be radios, flags, lights, intercoms, and a host of other devices. Chapter 8, emergency procedures. Before entry into a confined space, there should be a host of information available that ensures the safety of all personnel involved with the work. With that said, emergency procedures are a critical component of that. In a nutshell, all of these plans combined should ensure the safety of all parties involved with confined spaces. So we need to make sure that our teams are prepared for these 9 components. Number 1, emergency preparedness. This is where we're going to create a detailed plan that outlines specific actions that each party needs to take in case of an emergency. Even so, all team members should not only have a copy, but they should all understand it. Number 2, training and drills. This is where we need to make sure that all of our team members are trained on all aspects of emergency procedures. This includes, but not limited to, first aid and possibly rescue equipment. To ensure the effectiveness of that training, periodically, our team should conduct drills to practice the emergency plan and to assure that everybody knows their roles and responsibilities. Number 3, rescue equipment. All rescue equipment should not only be inspected periodically, but should be inspected before each use. So make sure that you have an understanding of how to inspect a harness, tripod, winches, breathing apparatuses, and whatever other tool that we use. Make sure to check the manufacturer's recommendations for any expiration dates, frequency of documented inspections, and any other miscellaneous information. Number 4, the role of the attendant. Like we spoke about earlier, the role of the attendant is critical to ensuring a safe entry and exit of a confined space. So that's why all attendants should remember these 3 points. Monitor the conditions inside and outside of the confined space, maintain effective communication, and be on alert for any signs of distress. And lastly, initiate the rescue. In the event of an emergency, the attendant must understand the rescue plan and be able to call external services for help. Number 5, immediate actions. This is where training and drills come into play. That's because you may need to quickly make a decision based on your instincts. You'll need to assess the situation, determine the extent of the emergency, and make a call. So depending on your call, always err on the side of safety, and if the situation is warranted, evacuate the confined space. Number 6, rescue operations. Whether your team is trained on confined space rescue or not will depend on how intricate this part of the plan is. When it comes to confined space rescue, you need to be highly trained and certified. So even if you're not a part of the rescue team, you can still play a monumental role. So if you have any retrieval systems on site, make sure that they are inspected and they are in good use. Also, you need to make sure you have an understanding of your rescue plan and have emergency services available to assist if needed. Number 7, medical and first aid procedures. If you're not trained to perform first aid, make sure that you have an understanding of who you're supposed to call in case of an emergency. If certified and it's safe to do so, provide first aid until paramedics arrive to take over. Number 8, communicate with emergency services. In the event of an emergency, make sure that you can clearly and accurately communicate the location and the extent of the situation to the emergency services. And number 9, post-emergency procedures. After you call for an emergency, the very last step that should be taken is to have a debrief with all parties involved. This is where you're going to talk about what went right, what went wrong, and what we can all do better in the future, and all other areas for improvement. So take the information gathered from that debrief, review our current emergency plan, and make any necessary revisions to improve any future response efforts. Don't forget to double check all documents to make sure that all necessary paperwork has been filled out. Chapter 9, review. We've covered a ton of information today, and as much as I hope you remember everything, I understand that that's just sometimes not the case. So before we conclude this training, let's spend the next few minutes going over the 7 key points that I want you to walk away with. Number 1, definition and characteristics. Remember, confined spaces are areas with limited entry and exit points. They're not designed for continuous occupancy and may present hazardous conditions. So if you ever question whether an area is a confined space or not, make sure to reach out to your supervisor or your local safety team. Number 2, permit required versus non-permit required. Remember, permit-required confined spaces could have potential hazards like toxic atmospheres and other safety concerns that can pose an immediate threat to the health and safety of the worker. Non-permit required confined spaces are still confined spaces, but with significantly less risk. So while the risk is low, these still require caution. Number 3, hazard identification. Before entering a confined space, the entire team should conduct a hazard assessment of the work site. Some hazards to watch out for are atmospheric issues that include oxygen deficient and enrichment atmospheres, and toxic and flammable gases. As for physical hazards, before entering the confined space, make sure you look for engulfment risks, moving equipment or machinery in any areas that can cause an employee to slip, trip, and fall. Number 4, roles and responsibilities. As we said before, depending on the confined space, there could be a variety of people involved. With that said, the 3 most important roles are going to be your entrant, your attendant, and your authorized supervisor. Remember, the entrant is the person that is actually going into the confined space and performing any of the work. The attendant is going to monitor the entrant, maintain constant and effective communication with the entrant, and initiate emergency procedures if necessary. And finally, the entry supervisor. They are ultimately responsible, will oversee the entire operation, and will authorize and cancel permits. Number 5, entry permit system. So before entering any permit required confined space, a permit must be filled out. This is going to identify the confined space, any of the hazards that may be apparent, and the safety measures required to mitigate that risk. Remember, the team should work on the permit together. The team should review the permit before entry. The supervisor will authorize the permit, and the supervisor will terminate the work when complete. Number 6, pre-entry and entry procedures. Before entry, we should conduct a hazard assessment, atmospheric testing, and ensure any and all safety equipment is in good usable condition and available. During entry, let's make sure that we all follow our safety procedures, maintain continuous monitoring along with communication, and be prepared for any and all emergencies. And number 7, emergency and rescue procedures. Not only do we need an emergency plan, but the emergency plan needs to take into account a wide range of various scenarios. Each of those scenarios should have a well thought out response, and all affected employees should be routinely trained. As for any rescue equipment, make sure that it's readily available, it's in good usable condition, and you have an understanding of who do you need to contact in case of an emergency. So as we're approaching the end of this training, I just wanted to take a quick second and acknowledge the effort that you've put forth today. I know that this information is a lot to take in, but by you being here and being engaged, that shows not only do you care about your safety, but the safety of others. So like I've said throughout the training, it's a lot of information. So if you need to go back and review specific chapters, please do so. If that's still not helping, or you have additional questions, comments, or concerns, please contact your supervisor or your safety department for any additional resources. So until next time, stay safe everyone, and go Cats.